Jake Morrison walked through the golden wheat fields of New Haven Colony like he did every morning. The twin suns cast purple shadows across the endless crops that fed 50,000 people on this distant world. Children ran between the grain stalks while their parents worked the soil with machines that hummed quietly in the warm air. This place was everything humanity had dreamed of when they first looked up at the stars. Lisa Grant stood on the observation deck of the defense station and watched the peaceful scene below. She commanded the small security force that protected New Haven, but they had never faced any real threats. Pirates avoided this sector, and the nearest alien civilization seemed friendly enough. Her biggest worry was usually helping lost farmers find their way home after dark. The morning seemed perfect until the sensors started screaming warnings. Lisa ran to her station and saw the readings that made her blood freeze. 12 massive ships were dropping out of hyperspace just outside the planet's atmosphere. They were huge black vessels shaped like deadly insects with crystalline hulls that reflected the sunlight like mirrors. These were not human ships. Jake was helping a farmer repair his harvester when his communication device started buzzing with emergency signals. He answered the call and heard Lisa's voice filled with panic. Unknown ships had appeared in orbit, and they were not responding to any attempts at communication. The colony had no weapons that could fight warships, and their small defense force was meant only for keeping order among the settlers. The alien ships moved into attack formation above New Haven. Lisa tried everything she could think of to make contact with them. She sent messages in every known alien language and broadcast on all frequencies that this was a peaceful colony with no military targets. The only response was silence from the black ships hanging above their world like vultures. Waiting to feed, Jake ordered all civilians to move to the underground shelters that had been built. In case of natural disasters, families grabbed their children and ran for safety, while the colony's few security officers tried to organize an evacuation. But there was nowhere to run on a planet surrounded by enemy ships and no way to fight back against such overwhelming force. The first energy beams struck the main settlement without warning. Buildings that had taken years to construct were turned to ash in seconds. The aliens were not targeting military facilities or strategic locations. They were killing everyone and everything they could find. Lisa watched in horror as the school where her own daughter attended classes disappeared in a ball of fire. Jake tried to coordinate rescue efforts from the emergency command center, but the alien bombardment was too intense. Every time someone tried to leave the shelters, they were cut down by beams from orbit. The attackers had sensors that could detect human life signs through solid rock, and they used this knowledge to hunt down every last person hiding underground. The wheat fields that had fed thousands of families became burning wastelands in minutes. The rivers where children played turned to steam under the alien weapons. The hospitals and schools and homes that represented humanity's hopes for the future were reduced to smoking craters. The aliens worked methodically to erase every trace of human presence from New Haven. Lisa managed to send one final transmission before her defense station was destroyed. Her hands shook as she recorded a message that would travel faster than light to reach Earth in 3 weeks. She told them about the attack and described the alien ships as best she could. She said that the attackers were not interested in surrender or negotiation. They just wanted to kill every human on New Haven. Jake held his wife and son as the shelter walls began to crack under the bombardment. He could hear the sounds of destruction above them and knew that their hiding place would not protect them much longer. His last thoughts were of the beautiful world they had built together and the hope that somehow humanity would learn what happened here. The alien commander watched the destruction from the bridge of his flagship. His species called themselves the Zephyrian Hegemony, and they viewed humans as primitive mammals who had no right to colonize space. They had decided to teach these upstart creatures a lesson about challenging their betters in the galaxy. The death of one small colony would surely convince the humans to stay in their own solar system, where they belonged. The bombardment continued for 6 hours until every human settlement on New Haven had been completely destroyed. The aliens used deep penetration weapons to collapse all the underground shelters and make sure no survivors could emerge later. They wanted to send a clear message that humans were not welcome in this part of space. When the attack was finished, the Zephyrian ships scanned the planet one final time to confirm that no human life remained. Their sensors detected only silence and death across the entire world. The commander was satisfied that they had eliminated the threat posed by human expansion into their territory. He ordered his fleet to return home and report their success to the hegemony leadership. The alien ships jumped back into hyperspace and left New Haven as a dead world. Where 50,000 people had lived and worked and raised their families, there was now only ash and radiation. The beautiful colony that had taken decades to build was gone in less than a day. The attackers believed they had solved their human problem with a simple show of force. But the Zephyrians had made a terrible mistake in their calculations about human nature. They thought that destroying one colony would frighten the rest of humanity into submission. They did not understand that humans responded to the murder of innocents not with fear, but with rage. They had awakened something in the human spirit that would soon teach them the true meaning of terror. The last human to die on New Haven was a small girl who had been hiding in a collapsed building. As the life faded from her eyes, she whispered a promise that seemed to echo across the empty world. Someone would remember what happened here. Someone would make the aliens pay for what they had done. The galaxy would learn that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their weapons, but their love for each other, and their willingness to fight to the death to protect their own. The message from New Haven arrived at Earth 3 weeks after the colony died. Admiral Kate Sullivan sat in her office at Terran Defense Command when the communication came through the faster-than-light relay network. She had been expecting routine reports about crop yields and new settlements, but instead, she received Lisa Grant's final transmission describing the attack that wiped out 50,000 innocent people. Kate played the message 12 times before she could fully accept what she was hearing. The voice of the doomed security commander described alien ships that appeared without warning and began killing civilians with no attempt at communication or negotiation. The recording ended with the sounds of explosions and screaming as the defense station was destroyed by orbital bombardment. President Ryan Cooper was in a meeting with trade representatives when Kate's emergency call reached him. She told him that they had lost all contact with New Haven Colony and that the final transmission indicated a massive alien attack. Ryan ended his meeting immediately and ordered the Global Council to assemble for an emergency session. The representatives would need to see this evidence for themselves. The council chamber fell silent as Kate presented the facts about New Haven's destruction. She showed them satellite images taken by automated probes that revealed the complete devastation of every human settlement on the planet. Where cities and farms had once thrived, there were now only blast craters and radioactive ash. No human life signs could be detected anywhere on the world. Dr. Elena Rodriguez studied the images of the alien ships captured by New Haven's sensors before they were destroyed. She was Earth's leading expert on alien biology and technology, but she had never seen vessels like these before. The crystalline hulls and insect-like designs suggested a species that was highly advanced and completely hostile to human expansion into space. General Marcus Bennett presented the military assessment to the stunned council members. The attack on New Haven was not a random pirate raid or a misunderstanding between different species. This was a deliberate act of genocide carried out by a sophisticated alien civilization that wanted to eliminate human presence in their territory. They had the technology and the will to destroy any human colony they encountered. Ryan stood before the assembled representatives and delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. He told them that the Zephyrian hegemony had made a fatal error in their understanding of human nature. They believed that murdering innocent civilians would frighten humanity into abandoning space exploration and colonization. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could imagine. The president ordered the immediate mobilization of Earth's industrial capacity for total war. Orbital shipyards that had been building exploration vessels and cargo haulers were converted to military production. Factories that made consumer goods were retooled to produce weapons and armor. Every resource of human civilization was focused on preparing for the coming conflict with the aliens who had killed their people. Kate was given command of the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. She worked with weapons designers to create new types of warships specifically designed to fight the Zephyrian fleet. Human ships would be built like armored predators with heavy guns and thick armor plating. They would not be elegant or beautiful like the alien vessels, but they would be deadly and efficient. Elena used her knowledge of alien psychology to develop strategies for fighting the Zephyrians. She studied their communications and learned their language so that human forces could send them messages they would understand. The aliens would learn that humans were not the primitive mammals they believed them to be. They were intelligent predators who had survived by adapting to any threat. Marcus trained the soldiers who would carry the war to the Zephyrian worlds. Human ground forces learned new tactics designed to fight alien opponents with different biology and technology. They practiced boarding actions on enemy ships and assault operations on hostile planets. Every man and woman who volunteered to serve understood that they were fighting not just for victory but for the honor of the dead. The industrial mobilization transformed Earth in ways that surprised even the planners. Citizens volunteered to work extra shifts in the weapons factories. Scientists abandoned their peaceful research to develop new military technologies. Artists and writers created propaganda that reminded everyone why they were fighting. The entire planet united behind the goal of making the aliens pay for what they had done. Intelligence agents were sent to gather information about Zephyrian society and military capabilities. Human spies learned that the hegemony controlled 3 core worlds that formed the foundation of their civilization. Nexus Prime was their industrial center where they built their ships and weapons. Kythera was their agricultural world that fed their population. Vorthak was their military stronghold where they trained their warriors. The first human warships began rolling out of the orbital yards 6 months after New Haven was destroyed. These vessels bore names that honored the dead colony and carried weapons designed to crack open alien worlds. The crews that manned them were volunteers who had lost friends or family in the attack. They understood that this was not a war of conquest but a mission of vengeance. Ryan addressed the nation as the first strike force prepared to depart for Zephyrian space. He told the people that humanity had always been willing to share the galaxy with peaceful neighbors, but that they would not tolerate the murder of innocents. The aliens had awakened Earth's capacity for both love and wrath. They would soon learn which force was stronger. Kate stood on the bridge of her flagship as the fleet prepared to jump into hyperspace. She thought about the children who had died on New Haven and promised them that their deaths would not be forgotten. The Zephyrians believed they had solved their human problem with a simple act of genocide. They were about to discover that they had only made it infinitely worse. The human fleet disappeared into hyperspace carrying weapons and soldiers whose only mission was to teach the galaxy a lesson about the consequences of murdering human civilians. Earth had awakened from its peaceful dreams and become something the aliens had never encountered before. They were about to face an enemy that fought not for territory or resources, but for the sacred duty of avenging the innocent dead. Captain Alex Thompson stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance and watched the first target appear on his screens. The Zephyrian listening post hung in the darkness between stars like a crystalline spider, waiting to detect any human ships that entered their territory. This outpost had probably reported New Haven's location to the fleet that destroyed the colony. Now it would pay the price for that betrayal. The human fleet approached the alien station using stealth technology that made their ships nearly invisible to Zephyrian sensors. Unlike the elegant curves and bright colors of alien vessels, human warships were painted black as space itself and built like armored weapons. They moved through the void like predators stalking prey that had no idea death was coming for them. Commander Sophie Martinez prepared her boarding team in the assault bay of the Vengeance. These soldiers had trained for months to fight in alien environments against opponents with different biology and technology. They wore heavy armor that could survive in vacuum and carried weapons designed to penetrate Zephyrian defensive systems. Each warrior understood that they were fighting for the 50,000 innocents who died on New Haven. The attack began with electronic warfare that disabled the station's communications and defensive systems. Human hackers had studied Zephyrian computer networks and learned how to turn their own technology against them. Within minutes, the listening post was isolated and helpless while human ships moved into position around it like wolves surrounding wounded prey. Alex ordered the boarding action to commence as soon as the station was secured. Sophie led her team through the docking tubes and into the alien structure where they moved like ghosts, through corridors filled with terrified defenders. The Zephyrians had never encountered human combat tactics, and they were not prepared for enemies who showed no mercy to those who murdered. Children, Intelligence Officer Lucas Brown had spent months learning the Zephyrian language and studying their psychology. He knew exactly how to break their will to resist and make them understand the consequences of their actions. As human soldiers secured each section of the station, they left messages written in perfect alien script that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. The Zephyrian commander of the listening post tried to surrender when he realized that resistance was hopeless. He offered to provide information about hegemony military positions in exchange for his life and the lives of his crew. Sophie looked at him with eyes as cold as the space between stars and told him that children on New Haven had begged for mercy too. The boarding action was completed in less than 2 hours with no human casualties. Every alien on the station was eliminated, and their equipment was destroyed to prevent any intelligence from falling into enemy hands. But before they left, the humans made sure to send a clear message to anyone who might find the wreckage. Lucas supervised the placement of the final warning as human forces prepared to withdraw from the captured station. Every surface was marked with words in the Zephyrian language that translated to a simple phrase that would spread terror throughout their civilization. Remember New Haven. The aliens would learn that humans never forgot those who harmed their people. The human fleet withdrew from the listening post and left it as a tomb floating in space. When other Zephyrian patrols arrived to investigate the loss of contact, they found their comrades dead, and the station covered with messages that chilled their compound eyes. The primitive mammals they had dismissed as weak were hunting them with skills that terrified even veteran warriors. Alex received new orders from Admiral Sullivan as the fleet prepared for their next target. Intelligence had located a Zephyrian supply depot that served several military outposts in the border region. This facility would be destroyed along with its garrison to send another message about the price of murdering human civilians. The war had only just begun, and already the aliens were learning to fear the darkness. The supply depot was a larger target than the listening post, but it was just as vulnerable to human tactics. The facility's commanders had grown complacent after years of facing no serious threats in this sector. They never imagined that the species they had tried to exterminate would hunt them down with such deadly efficiency and ruthless determination. Sophie prepared her assault teams for a more complex operation that would require capturing the depot's central computer core before destroying the facility. The information contained in those systems would help human forces locate other Zephyrian installations and plan future attacks. Every piece of intelligence brought them closer to the core worlds where the real war would be fought. The attack on the supply depot demonstrated human tactical superiority in ways that shocked the defending aliens. Stealth ships delivered assault teams directly to critical locations, while electronic warfare disabled defensive systems. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move and counter their strategies before they could implement them. Lucas interrogated captured Zephyrian officers and learned valuable information about their military structure and defensive plans. The aliens were beginning to understand that they faced an opponent unlike anything they had encountered before. Humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and primitive savagery that made them incredibly dangerous in close combat. The supply depot was completely destroyed after human forces extracted all useful intelligence from its computers. The facility's destruction cut off supplies to 3 forward military bases and forced the Zephyrians to withdraw from positions they had held for decades. The psychological impact was even greater than the material damage as word spread that humans were systematically hunting down anyone connected to the New Haven massacre. Alex stood in the ruins of the depot's command center and thought about the families who had died on the colony world. Each successful mission brought humanity closer to justice for those innocent victims, but the real fight was still ahead. The Zephyrians would soon realize that they faced an enemy that would never stop hunting them until every debt was paid in full. The human fleet departed from the wreckage of the supply depot and melted back into the darkness between stars. Their next targets were already identified and marked for destruction as part of a campaign that would teach the galaxy about human determination. The Zephyrians had started this war by committing genocide, but humans would finish it on their own terms. News of the attacks spread throughout Zephyrian space as survivors reported encounters with human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere and strike with devastating effect. The creatures they had dismissed as harmless farmers were revealing themselves to be apex predators whose capacity for violence matched their love for their own kind. The hunt was just beginning, and the aliens were learning that they had become the prey. Admiral Kevin Price commanded the human fleet as it entered the Cathera system. where the Zephyrians grew the food that fed their entire civilization. This beautiful world with its perfect climate and fertile soil had sustained the alien empire for thousands of years. Now it would become the first core world to feel humanity's wrath for the massacre of innocent civilians on New Haven Colony. Colonel Amy Foster led the atmospheric engineering teams that would transform Kithra from a garden world into a poisoned wasteland. The humans had developed new weapons specifically designed to destroy agricultural ecosystems and make planets uninhabitable for the species that depended on them. These tools of environmental warfare would teach the aliens about hunger and desperation. The invasion of Kithera began with orbital bombardment that targeted not cities or military bases, but the agricultural infrastructure that made the planet valuable. Human warships rained destruction on irrigation systems and processing plants, while atmospheric processors released engineered toxins that would contaminate the soil for generations. The Zephyrians watched in horror as their perfect world died before their eyes. Major Danny Clark coordinated the ground assault on Nexus Prime, where the Zephyrians built their starships and weapons. This industrial world was protected by massive defensive systems, but human forces had learned to use the aliens' own technology against them. Tech Sergeant Megan Torres led hacking teams that turned automated factories into instruments of sabotage and destruction. The cyber warfare campaign against Nexus Prime was a masterpiece of human intelligence and creativity. Megan's specialists infiltrated the planet's computer networks and reprogrammed manufacturing systems to produce defective components and corrupted software. Assembly lines that had built warships for centuries began creating useless scrap metal, while quality control systems reported everything as perfect. Amy walked through the dying fields of Kithara and felt satisfaction as she watched the poisoned crops wither under the alien sun. The Zephyrians had learned to take their agricultural abundance for granted, but now they would discover what it meant to watch their children starve. The toxins her teams had released would ensure that nothing edible could grow on this world for at least 50 years. The defenders of both worlds quickly realized that they faced an enemy unlike anything in their military experience. Human forces did not follow conventional tactics or respect traditional rules of warfare. They fought with a combination of advanced technology and ruthless pragmatism that made them incredibly effective against opponents who expected civilized behavior. Kevin received reports from his ground commanders that described the systematic destruction of Zephyrian infrastructure on both target worlds. The aliens had built their civilization, assuming they would never face serious opposition, but humans were demonstrating the fragility of complex societies when attacked by determined enemies. Every success brought them closer to total victory over those who had murdered innocent families. The Zephyrian High Command finally attempted to open diplomatic channels after realizing that their core worlds were under direct attack. They sent Hierarch Zakth to a neutral space station, where he hoped to negotiate some kind of settlement that would end the human offensive. The alien diplomat carried authority to offer significant concessions in exchange for peace. Ambassador Rachel Ward met the Zephyrian representative in a sterile conference room aboard the neutral station. She had been selected for this role because of her expertise in alien psychology and her complete lack of sympathy for those who murdered children. Rachel listened politely as the hierarch explained his species' willingness to negotiate reasonable terms for ending the conflict. The alien diplomat offered to establish formal borders between human and Zephyrian space along with reparations for the destruction of New Haven Colony. He suggested that both species could benefit from peaceful coexistence and shared technology. Zakth believed that these generous terms would satisfy human demands for justice and allow his people to rebuild their damaged worlds. Rachel's response chilled the alien representative to his core as she explained humanity's actual position regarding negotiations. She told him that the Zephyrians had forfeited any right to mercy when they chose to slaughter 50,000 innocent civilians without provocation. The children who died on New Haven had not been given a chance to negotiate for their lives. The human ambassador described the systematic destruction that would continue until the Zephyrian hegemony was completely dismantled as a military and political force. Their core worlds would be stripped of all capacity to threaten human colonies, and their population would learn to survive on the charity of those they had tried to exterminate. There would be no negotiated settlement, because genocide deserved only total defeat. Zakth tried to explain that his people had acted according to their understanding of galactic law and their right to defend their territory from expansion by inferior species. He argued that the attack on New Haven was a limited military action, designed to establish clear boundaries rather than an act of genocide. The hierarch seemed genuinely confused by human refusal to accept what he considered reasonable explanations. Rachel ended the IE meeting by informing the alien diplomat that his species had demonstrated their true nature when they chose to murder helpless farmers instead of attempting peaceful contact. Humans would ensure that the galaxy learned about Zephyrian brutality and that such crimes never happened again. The only terms available were complete surrender and acceptance of whatever justice humanity chose to impose. The diplomatic failure convinced the Zephyrian leadership that they faced an enemy that could not be reasoned with or appeased through traditional means. Human forces were demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything in their intelligence files, while showing no interest in limiting their objectives to reasonable military goals. The mammals they had dismissed as primitive were revealing themselves to be apex predators. Danny reported from Nexus Prime that the industrial sabotage campaign had succeeded beyond all expectations. The planet's manufacturing capacity had been reduced to less than 10% of normal output, while defective products from compromised assembly lines were causing failures throughout the Zephyrian fleet. The aliens were learning that their technological superiority meant nothing when humans controlled their production systems. Amy completed her mission on Cathara by releasing final toxins that would ensure the agricultural world remained poisoned for generations. The Zephyrians would have to import food from distant colonies while their core population faced starvation and social collapse. The paradise they had taken for granted was now a monument to the consequences of murdering human children. Kevin prepared his fleet for the final assault on Vorthak, where the Zephyrian military trained their warriors and planned their campaigns. This heavily fortified world would require different tactics, but the outcome was already certain. Human forces had proven their superiority in every engagement, and the aliens were running out of options for meaningful resistance. The systematic destruction of two core worlds had taught the galaxy about human capacity for total warfare when their people were threatened. The Zephyrians were learning that genocide carried a price that would destroy everything they had built over thousands of years. The final battle would determine whether they accepted defeat or chose to die fighting an enemy they could never defeat. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution as the human fleet approached Vorthak for the final battle of the war. This fortress world housed the military academy, where Zephyrian warriors had trained for generations, and the command centers that had planned the massacre of New Haven Colony. Today it would become the graveyard of an empire that had learned too late about the consequences of murdering human children. The orbital defenses around Vorthak were the most sophisticated the Zephyrians had ever built, with energy shields and missile batteries that could destroy entire fleets. But human engineers had studied these systems for months and developed new weapons specifically designed to crack open the strongest fortifications. The aliens would discover that their greatest stronghold was just another target waiting to be destroyed. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Baker prepared his assault troops for the ground invasion that would follow the orbital bombardment. These soldiers had fought their way across two core worlds and seen the systematic destruction of an alien civilization that thought itself superior to humanity. They understood that this final battle was not about conquest, but about ensuring that no one ever again made the mistake of murdering innocent human families. The attack began with massive kinetic strikes that shattered the outer defensive shells around the military installations. Human warships firing projectiles at significant fractions of light speed punched through energy shields like they were made of paper. The Zephyrians had never faced weapons with such devastating power, and their defensive doctrine collapsed within the first hour of combat. Kate watched from her flagship as the planet's surface erupted in explosions that could be seen from orbit. Each detonation represented years of careful planning and preparation as human forces systematically dismantled the military infrastructure that had seemed impregnable just hours before. The aliens were learning that their technological achievements meant nothing against enemies who fought with absolute determination. The ground assault commenced as soon as the orbital defenses were neutralized and landing zones were secured by the bombardment. Tony led his troops into the smoking ruins of the military academy, where young Zephyrians had once learned the arts of war. Now, human soldiers would teach them about the reality of facing opponents who showed no mercy to those who harmed their people. The fighting on Vorthak was fierce but brief, as demoralized alien defenders realized they faced enemies whose capabilities exceeded anything in their experience. Human soldiers moved through the fortified complexes like unstoppable forces of nature, while their weapons carved through defensive positions that had been designed to withstand conventional attacks. The Zephyrian military machine was being dismantled piece by piece. General Marcus Bennett transmitted humanity's final ultimatum to the surviving Zephyrian leadership from the ruins of their supreme command center. He stood among the wreckage of computers that had once planned campaigns across the galaxy and delivered terms that would determine whether their species survived the next few hours. The choice was complete surrender or total extermination. The human general explained that the Zephyrian hegemony had forfeited its right to exist when it chose to commit genocide against peaceful colonists who had offered no threat to anyone. 50,000 innocent people had died on New Haven because aliens believed they were too primitive to deserve life among the stars. That arrogance had cost them everything they had built over thousands of years. Marcus described the new reality that the Zephyrians would face if they chose to surrender rather than die fighting. Their military would be permanently disbanded and their weapons destroyed under human supervision. Their core worlds would be governed by human administrators who would ensure they never again possessed the capacity to threaten anyone. Their children would learn about the price of genocide in schools run by the species they had tried to eliminate. The surviving Zephyrian leaders gathered in an emergency session to consider terms that would preserve their species at the cost of their independence. They had watched 3 core worlds fall to human forces, whose capabilities seemed to exceed every estimate in their intelligence files. The mammals they had dismissed as harmless farmers had revealed themselves to be apex predators whose capacity for violence matched their love for their own kind. Hierarch Zaxth spoke for his people when he formally accepted humanity's terms and ordered all Zephyrian forces to lay down their weapons immediately. The decision came too late to save their civilization, but early enough to prevent the complete extinction that humans were clearly capable of inflicting. The hegemony that had ruled this sector for millennia was ending not in glory, but in total defeat. Kate received the surrender notification as human forces completed their occupation of the last military installations on Vorthak. The fortress world that had seemed impregnable was now under complete human control, with its defenders either dead or prisoners awaiting judgment. The war that began with the massacre of innocents was ending with the destruction of those who had ordered their deaths. Tony walked through the captured military academy and thought about the children who had attended school on New Haven before alien ships turned their world into ash. These young Zephyrians would grow up learning about the consequences of genocide, while human teachers made sure they understood why their empire had fallen. The lesson would be passed down through generations who would never forget the price of murdering human families. The formal surrender ceremony took place aboard Kate's flagship, with representatives from both species witnessing the end of Zephyrian independence. The documents signed that day established human authority over the former hegemony worlds and created mechanisms for ensuring their permanent demilitarization. The aliens who had started this war by killing innocents were now subjects of the species they had tried to exterminate. Marcus addressed the galaxy through subspace communications networks that would carry his message to every civilized world within 100 light years. He explained that humanity had demonstrated its capacity for both mercy and vengeance, depending on how other species chose to treat human colonies. Those who offered friendship would find it returned, but those who harmed innocents would face the same fate as the Zephyrian hegemony. The human fleet began establishing permanent bases throughout former Zephyrian space to ensure that the terms of surrender were honored and that no military buildup could threaten human colonies in the future. These installations would serve as monuments to the 50,000 people who died on New Haven and reminders to the galaxy about the consequences of underestimating human determination. Kate stood in the observation lounge of her flagship and watched Zephyrian civilians begin the long process of rebuilding their shattered worlds under human supervision. Their children would grow up learning to respect the species their parents had tried to destroy while former soldiers worked to repair the damage caused by their leaders' arrogance and cruelty. The war was over, but its lessons would echo through the galaxy for generations as other species learned about humanity's true nature. Humans could be peaceful neighbors and generous allies, but they became unstoppable forces of vengeance when their families were threatened. The Zephyrians had discovered this truth too late to save their empire, but early enough to preserve their lives. In the end, the aliens learned what Earth had always known about the species that called themselves human. When they loved completely, and when they sought justice, they became the darkness between stars that consumed everything in their path. The peaceful farmers of New Haven were gone, but their memory had become a shield protecting every human colony among the stars.